right, good morning, good morning. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are still trickling in for seats, but let's go ahead and get started so we can stay on time. I'm Katie, I'm the general manager here at ADAC, and I want to welcome everyone back to day 3 of Discover ADAC. We're so glad to see everybody in person, masked and everything. Thank you so much for abiding by our protocols so we can keep doing this safely this week. So it is our last day, but I do want to remind everybody to grab a copy of your event guide. We do have some fabulous events left in store today. Make sure that you register for anything that you want to be a part of today, because we do have some events with limited capacity, and of course we have to stick to that right now. Also, it's our last day to interact with us on social media for Discover ADAC. Take lots of pictures, post them on all of our social media channels. It's at ADAC Atlanta, and use the hashtag Discover ADAC. And I want to thank our sponsors today. Our showroom sponsor is Tebow. After this panel presentation, we'll go over to Tebow on the first floor for a reception and book signing. And then I also want to thank our fabulous media partner, Veranda. Veranda is, of course, a great media partner, not only for Fall Discover ADAC, but of course they co-sponsor our Spring Market Design ADAC, as well as our Southeast Designers and Architect of the Year Awards. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ellen Golly, who's the executive editor of Veranda.
Thanks so much, Katie. There is this beautiful harmony with our topic, and my thanks to Katie today, and that is that to see everybody in person again, and the familiar faces, and just being able to laugh and talk and all of these things. Katie and Mackenzie and everyone pivoted so beautifully and allowed us to do this over the last year in a way that kept the conversation going, kept everything alive. But to be back is really something. I mean, my voice is a little bit hoarse from laughing last night, and you know. So anyway, I want to thank ADAC first and foremost for welcoming us back here and having everyone back here and just being able to put this together so beautifully. Our sponsors, Tebow and Julian Chichester, we're so excited. We're so excited to be in the Tebow showroom. After this, we've got some really exciting book signings. So there's a lot to get to, and I always need like a little note on here that says, stay on script, just keep moving. You know, well, we could go anywhere with these discussions, and we might, you know. But the synergy between being back here and this topic, you know, as a preamble, I'll just say, you know, we're talking tiny little things, the design decisions that speak volumes. What we, in our discussions leading up to this, we kept coming back to this common thread of comfort. And we were trying to, you know, we were talking about the aspects of a room that sort of have a gravitational pull, that are magnetic, that maybe you don't see, you know, you're like, this is at its least meaningful. It's the things you see in an Instagram post and you're liking it and you're not sure what you're responding to, but you're responding to something that's pulling you there. But I sort of think it's especially as we talked a bit on this topic, it's the same things that pull you back to the same restaurant, the same chair, the same corner of the garden. The places, and I can, you know, right off the bat, I think comfort, ease, harmony, balance, you know, all of the warmth. And that's how we feel being back. And what I've done here is we have 3 atmospheric masters to talk about these things that we're not even sure, you know, it's sort of like the sum of these beautiful parts that bring a room into this beautiful balance that draws you in. So I was just saying, this is one of the first panels I've done since I've needed reading glasses. So there's a little bit of some, you know, I got to navigate that a little bit. So anyway, if I look lost sometimes, it's because I forget that I actually can't read. So by way of introductions of our panelists, I thought what would be really great to do is to do it in order that we have seen them on our pages this year, because every one of them has had this blockbuster feature or has it coming up on the pages of Veranda in 2021. And so I thought we'd just go in order with what we saw them. So Young Pak brought us right out of the gate with a bang in the January-February issue. You'll see it on the slideshow once that, if that gets going, is that ombre stairwell that was in our January-February issue. The story was called Roaring Twenties Redux, and it was a renovation of a 1920s home in Ansley Park. So right here in Atlanta. And what was so beautiful about what he did there was this multi-layered renovation, gone through so many, and he managed to bring the soul back to this house. And one thing he said in it was, after 3 large renovations, a house usually doesn't have much left. 3 strikes and you're out. And yet, if you look at the story, in spite of that, he found what was lost, and he made it feel like it had never left, this 1920s vibe that was so beautiful, but lives very well in the modern day. So Yang had the shortest commute this morning. He's right around the corner. His firm, Pack Height and Associates, which he started in 1997, is right around the corner here. He studied classical architecture while studying in Italy. He's a Norman Haskins alum, and welcome, Yang. Are you welcoming us today, or
I think
mean,
you are. This is my home turf.
We're happy to join you today, Yang. So, and you'll see a lot of his work on the slideshow up there. So, welcome, Yang. Thanks so much for being with us. We're going to jump to the May-June issue, which is when we featured designers' own houses. And Ken Pursley, an architect in Charlotte, who we featured his mid-century house in Charlotte. And that one, I remember looking at the photos when it first came in, and it was like, it had like an atmosphere you could feel, you know, and it was this mix of materials that was just sort of magical. And he is the author of a new book, Finding Home, which you can take home with you after the reception of the panel. And one thing I loved about his project that we featured was that he put modernism in these wonderful, like, congenial, personifying terms. He said, at its best, modernism is mysterious and coy. At its worst, it can be argumentative and blustery. And I immediately imagined, like, modernism as this, like, that friend that we all had in the neighborhood where you're just like, listen, I think you're great. You have so many gifts. If you could just relax and be cool, like, that would be so great. I mean, is that sort of a fair assessment? You know? Yeah, it's like, listen, you're great, and you have so many wonderful gifts. But sometimes you can be a little out there, right? And so his house, his project was not out there. He brought it back. I think he can tell you in this discussion there was some Miami Vice stuff going on there. But speaking of being an uncool friend, is it out of line to recognize it's your birthday today?
Happy birthday!
So how's that for an uncomfortable welcome?
You know, we'll see. So far, so good.
So Ken was in our May-June issue, and again, he has a new book out, and so you'll all get to see that afterwards. So our third panelist, Ashley Whitaker, we're into the sneak peek realm here because, and spoiler alert, I don't actually have the sneak peek because I had full intentions. She has this standout, drop-dead story in our November-December issue, which we literally just sent to press like days ago. It's still like in the ether, like traveling there. And so I sent out an email and I said, is it okay if I just bring this like sneak peek of that? Because we have the opening spreads on that you'll see. Can we start go ahead and start that? There we go. And so, so anyway, in all of them that we did, Jan, Feb, and then May, June, and then I wanted to show this November, December, and I got crickets in return. What I took was a hard no. Was like, so I didn't include it, but I did include some photos, but I didn't want to get fired, so I just like.
That's true. Not worth getting fired.
But Ashley did grace the cover in May 2018, and so that story is up there. That's what you'll see circulating there. So anyway, so Ashley. She is a Florida native like me, and she worked with Markham Roberts before starting her firm, which she thinks was in 2006.
I think.
Yeah, in New York. And she also has a new book out, The Well-Loved House, which when you read it, because it will also be available afterwards in the Tebow showroom, you'll know exactly why we couldn't do without her insight on this topic. Oh. And the topic is, like, what are those things that are sort of unseen that make a house have sort of a gravitational pull, a room have a gravitational pull, a bar have a gravitational pull, whatever, So anyway, so with that, welcome to all three of you. I'm so glad to have you here, and let's just jump right in.
Sure.
Thank you, Ellen.
Okay. Ken, this topic, it was inspired in part by something I read in your book, Finding Home, and it was about, I think you described it as an extrasensory exercise by your professor that he asked you to do. Would you tell everybody a little bit about that?
Sure. It was kind of a, goofy college exercise where he said, I want you to go outside, close your eyes, and just take in what's around you. And, so I did it, and there was kind of this epiphany moment that came out that there were really two sounds that came forward, and one was the car, which kind of starts quietly and gets louder and then goes away. And then more subtly in the background, there was the sound of the crickets, which was a little more understated but a more consistent melody. And it was, this moment in design school where I had this thought of, well, within design, there's kind of these car moments. There's the color, the fabric, the black and steel, whatever it is. I mean, these things that kind of come and they go and they come and they go. But then there is this sort of more subtle undertone of it, which I think of the crickets being proportion and light and movement and the things that really matter. And I think whenever we're in a space or whenever we're observing things, both these worlds coexist. And some of it is taking your mind and your thoughts and sort of channeling, what is the undercurrent here? What's the deeper thought? And I did, when Ellen teed up the questions, she said, can you give an example? And I've got one quick one that I'll share. But like when I was growing up, my bedroom was on the second floor of the house, and there was a long, skinny dormer that was in the room. And at some point, I decided that's where I wanted to sleep. So I pulled the bedding off and set up a sort of a make-to mattress. And I remember if you laid backwards, you could look out the dormer and see the sky and the trees. And we've got, two different projects where we've created what I call the sleepy dormer. And so they're houses, one of them's in the book, that where we kind of were living in the roof lines. And I thought, gosh, lake houses, it's nice to have that extra spot to sleep. And so, in that case, it's a long, skinny dormer, and we put made a cushion for it and put a niche to plug in your cell phone and a place for water. But the point is that it's the emotional connection we were linking. It wasn't the sheetrock walls. It wasn't the stamped, plaster ceiling that we had when growing up, or the I Love New York sleeping bag or whatever it was. That it was much more. It's much more about this feeling, right? And so that's I think an example of these sort of crickets that we're talking about, are these underlying feelings that are beyond the surface. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Jan, you accomplish that with sort of the idea of balance, right? What do you think of when you think of the crickets?
Well, I think, for me, it's creating that detail that helps create the moment. And also, it's also the environment.
Yeah.
Being by the window, looking at the view. It's not all about designing from a detail standpoint in the sense of like creating that moment. And I think, your line, sleeping porches, we don't do that anymore because we have air conditioning. And when you're in a secondary home in the mountains, you want to feel that air. You want to see the view. You want to kind of cut off technology and get back to the moments where you can hear yourself breathing, hear the crickets, maybe even see a firefly. So,
Ashley, what are the crickets in interior design?
I think the crickets for me are really, I think what we're kind of talking about in general is comfort. And what makes a house, what makes you want to be in a room, what makes you kind of want to explore, what makes you want to go into the next room. I feel like as we design, we're not thinking about the room that you're in. A lot of times you're thinking, I mean, of course we are, but we're thinking about the room that you're seeing from that room. Like, what else is happening? What makes this visually exciting? What makes you want to enter the dining room? Is there a secondary table with a banquette there where people can sit after dinner and have drinks? And I just think it's the comfort of a house. And a lot of that I learned from Markham Roberts in furniture planning, and really creating an exciting furniture plan. There's something that's flipping through, and it's the living room that was in veranda. And it's a New York City living room. It's a sort of important room, but we made it very sort of comfortable for the family. And the children have band practice in this room once a week on Wednesdays. There's like 9 kids that congregate in this room. And it really stands the test of time. And that to me is comfort. I guess that's what I really keep coming back to, and what makes a room approachable, and what you want to see and do in that room.
Well, As a writer, it's what I'm thinking of is I know the big splashy pictures in the magazines are like, I'm guilty of it. I'll just go look at the pictures. But when you read a lot of the stories, you do hear about the band practice, in there, or like in the story Upcoming with Yours, like there was just this beautiful, George Knight had put it in such, like the kids can tumble down the stairs. The kitchen was made more modern for the family, so that they could live there, and it wouldn't be something like you do this here and you do this here. So, I'm just going to toot a horn for like text, for being able to hear more about what happens in these rooms. And I also think, like, just pausing to clarify, the tiny little things that we're talking about, they're the big things, they're the big things that are sort of behind all of the headlines, I think, of these stories. And that's what I think makes you respond to these things without really knowing it. Ashley, right from the start in your book, you talk a great deal about light, and I wasn't even sure if you knew how much you talked about light when you were talking about memorable rooms from your childhood.
Yes.
You described, there was other descriptors, but there was always like a bright, a sunny, a light-filled. There was always all these avenues for them to come in. Why is this so integral? Why is this such are you always trying to balance light? Is that always where you
As Young is saying, you can take the girl out of Florida, but
Yeah.
you can't take
Right.
Florida out of the girl. So I think, Exhibit A, right here, the room on the right, it's a Georgian house. It was 6 over 6 windows. The husband was from Florida. He said, I want this house to feel much more connected to the outdoors. And how do we accomplish that? And we did that by increasing the window size, increasing the pane size, putting in French doors wherever we could. I also love a narrow house, a house where a lot of times we'll start working with an architect and it's like room after room after room. You're almost like in a railroad apartment in New York. I feel like you've got to really get to the light. And I love walking into an entrance hall and having light coming in from the different rooms that you enter that entrance hall that are off that entrance hall. It just brings a brightness and really a happiness to a house, I think, as much as anything.
Yeah.
And then I'm also a big proponent of just the clearest possible windows that we can get our architects to use. And I think that really changes the light a lot in the house. Everyone's kind of going more with these sort of low E windows, and which we do for
Fabric.
well, okay, yes, we do. And what is interesting is I bought a couple things from the Bunny Mellon sale, and the arms are just shredded, and the seats, everything just had to be redone. And I'm looking at my house now, and Exhibit A, my curtains are starting to fade a little bit, but I'm like, that's patina. I'm like, it's like Bunny Mellon,
Yeah, right.
But yes, you have a good point about that. It does protect the fabrics. So anyway, light's important to me.
Yeah, Young, same. Is it central too?
Oh, definitely. Like, I do a lot of U-shaped houses that are narrow.
Yeah.
So you have the public facade, but then you got the inner courtyard. And having 3 sides with lots of light, you control the view, you also control the light, but all the living spaces are looking towards the light.
Yes.
And so you can still have the privacy, but then you've got the inner courtyard giving you that light-filled courtyard. And I think courtyard living is wonderful just because you can control the indoor-outdoor aspect of a house.
True.
So, I'm sure, Ken, you
Yeah, and even beyond the light, I think especially now, there's so many window and door systems that open up, and it's kind of what Jan was talking about before. It's even, to me, moves beyond light to this immersive experience of we did a house at the lake where it had a nano walls, which is a folding door system you can open up and a screen will roll down. And what's great about that is you can turn your living room into your screen porch without having to replicate these spaces. And so it moves beyond the view and the light to hearing the crickets and smelling the crackle and the smoke. And it's just much more, a connection as we are so digital in our world. Like I'd look for those moments of, feeling like I'm actually in the environment and comfortable.
Connected. I think that's a huge word in what we do. How am I connected to the next room? How am I connected to the outdoors? how am I connecting with my family in this house? You know, if I'm
Yeah,
at the
that's a
kitchen
big-
island, what's going on that I'm looking at? Are people sitting in front of the fireplace? Are they reading? I'm in another room, but how am I connected? And I think that's exactly that.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of Southern homes were very formal homes. And I deal with a lot of historical renovations. And we don't have people serving us anymore. So the back of house was always not a big deal. And now the back of house is the house.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Having all that open up and having that family room, kitchen, that was more of a West Coast concept that really needed to be in the South. And we've got such wonderful landscapes that in a lot of these formal homes that I've worked on, you only looked at the road.
Yeah.
And
Because you're in the front.
now we don't live that way.
Yeah.
And I think bringing that family aspect to a modern way of living is so important, but you can still have the bones of the classical architecture there, but the house lives more modern.
Yeah.
So,
That was, I mean, that's integral, I think, to the architectural updates in the story that Ashley has upcoming in, is exact, they were saying, they were taking, this used to be a service space, you know, but it needs to be part of, it's the heart of the home, you know. Yang, I want to talk, this was so interesting to me as we were talking about this, is that sort of, we were talking about light, but with nature, you talked about something that goes highly overlooked that I thought was so interesting, that mature trees.
oh yeah.
Talk about why these are so important to how you live inside and how, you know, sort of a house has that inviting presence.
I mean, I live in Atlanta because of the trees.
Yeah, right.
I grew up
You
in
guys have
Miami,
nice trees.
and Miami is all about the light, palm trees. But I lived in a part of Miami that had banyan trees with an amazing canopy. And it could be 100 degrees, and if you're underneath that tree canopy, it's about 80.
Yeah.
In Atlanta, and I've noticed this really throughout the South, all your best neighborhoods have a mature tree canopy. You know,
Yeah.
you got Belmead, you got Highland Park, you got, you know, so really there is a distinction where up north you don't have 200-foot trees.
They're not 200, but we have 200-year-old trees.
We
So
have 80-year-old trees that are 200 feet. So I think one of the things is that, like, when I go through Buckhead, the architecture could be brand new, but if it's within a tree canopy and you really work within that, it gives you that sense of like it belongs.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas
Instant history, really.
Whereas if you go in the perimeter and they just put a subdivision in a farmland, and you've got 10, 20-foot trees, it just sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
So having that the trees are a luxury. Now I think here, I take down trees too, just because it's the end of a life cycle. But we always work around the mature trees as much as we can.
Yeah.
And that gives you that instant livability, and just in a warming environment, you got a 20-degree temperature change.
Yeah.
I mean,
So.
think about just the two things that you just touched on are like, you know, not even, it's warmth and that sense of belonging.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's what makes you want to go into a space. And like, you know, with mature trees, you're obviously getting the comfort, the shade, and what that's reminding me of is, Ken, in your own home, you have these beautiful windows, all this light, but you actually have eaves that are sort of shading a bit and keeping everything more comfortable, because you have a lot of windows, right? I mean, that's about comfort as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's
right?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's sort of the how the house relates to the environment. And this house, it happens to be what's called a passive solar house, but it's got overhangs that are designed in the summer to shade the house, so the sun never actually comes in the windows. But
Yeah.
then in the winter, the sun's lower, and it heats the house. And it's, you know, it's interesting versus all western facing windows where you're kind of fighting against the sun.
Yes.
And
Right.
so, you know, I think, you know, part of architecture is just finding that alignment with the environment and kind of trying to find the right way to kind of work with it. And I do think air conditioning is a tricky thing because it does sort of override a lot of these more intuitive devices. I mean, you look at an old farmhouse, you know, and they plant trees around their house because it shades it, and then the trees drop in the winter and then they collect the sun. I mean, so there's some real practical aspects that I feel like can just be lost because we can kind of engineer our way out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Young was talking about a project that he's working on and saying how the exposure is north. And really, I grew up in a house in Florida with southern exposure, so I always felt very strongly about having the light streaming in and streaming in. And we just built a house in Millbrook, New York, and it has northern exposure. And there's nothing prettier than looking out on a north view with the sunlight on the view.
Yeah.
And it's very relaxing to the eye to look north. And that's something I always, in New York City, I always kind of fight for a southern exposure in the city because you really need a lot of light. But anyway, I just think that's another way to kind of control your light, is thinking about your exposures. And sometimes my clients will have a wonderful place for a loggia and it's got western exposure. And I'm like, you are going to die there during cocktail hour. This is not going to be pleasant. Okay, so we need to rethink this, whether it's awnings, whether it's reorienting the house or whatnot. But I think where your light is coming from is as important as having a lot of light.
Yeah.
Well, that's the artist light.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, if you look
Exactly.
at- I've done
Monet.
artist studios
Yep.
with a glass roof and a glass facade facing north, and the lights hitting you and reflecting back, like you said. So I think that's.
And I think that's, you know, these are the things that we don't know why we want to be there. You know, it's not like everyone sat around talking about the Northern Light, like, you know, but these, it's like breaking it down. What it does make it so gravitational. And like, we just finished judging the Outdoor Living Awards for our March-April issue for next year. And so I find it so interesting because I'll look through all these entries, you know, and I'll be like, oh, that's great furniture. I love that, you know, and then, you know, Bunny Williams comes in and says, do I want to sit there? No, I'm going to be burning up. I don't see any shade. I don't have, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, and then all of a sudden it breaks down to something so easy. You're like, no, I don't want to be there. You know, all of that metal, that would hurt my, you know, like, and I, like it breaks down into something so simple. So anyway, that reminded me of like, you know, you're going to burn up out there, you know? Ken, so you were talking about no matter where you go, it doesn't matter if it's like a restaurant or maybe a project you're thinking of taking on, you're constantly looking for elements of comfort. What are you looking for? You gave an example during our talk about being in a bar, and that's why I mentioned like, you know, like sight lines and stuff like that. What are you looking for?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of it, there's a architect and a writer named Christopher Alexander who wrote this book called The Timeless Way of Building. And he also wrote a book called A Pattern Language, which a lot of people know. But one of his assertions is there's this thing he calls the quality without a name. And the argument is that there's this universal sort of feeling you have in a space that feels good. And, you know, that it's hard to identify or hard to name, and I was, you know, thinking of like being at a niece last night for dinner, and a lot of y'all may know that restaurant, but if any of us were probably asked to design a restaurant, I'm not sure it would look like that. It's got a plywood ceiling and collected lights, and it looks like, you know, things from a junkyard, and it feels great. And I would argue that there's something there, and so, you know, I tend to try to take a mental inventory and library of things that feel good. So if it is a seat by the window, like I'll bring a tape measure, like this is a good height, and just, you know, and to me that this to how we're connecting, you know, that's that deeper, you know, as it's come up through this talk, it's sort of, you know, emotional connection. I mean, that's really kind of the thing without a name is sort of, that's really what the point of it all.
Yeah.
And when you feel that, it's trying to understand, well, what is that orientation, that sill height, and that window. And I kind of argued that style is a secondary thing, and that's great. But like if you get that emotional connection right, it can be Italian or French or modern. Or it doesn't really matter. You know, to me, it's more about, you know, going to that deeper level of understanding.
Yeah.
Well, especially after a year of not seeing anybody, looking at a screen,
Yes.
you know, to have that connection
Yeah.
Yeah.
and being outside. I mean, last night was the first day of fall, felt like it. And, you know, we crave that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, and I think having that creates those moments where you can have a deep conversation, have a good drink,
Yes,
have good
absolutely.
food.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that to me is living.
Yeah. Well, I always say we start with a furniture plan, which is what I was talking about from learning from working with Markham for the time that I did. And to Bunny's point, and maybe I heard Bunny say this somewhere along the line, probably, I say, do I want to sit there? I put a living room together and I put myself in every single seat in that room, just on a piece of paper. Who am I talking to if I'm sitting here? Where am I putting my drink down? What if someone wants to pull up a chair to where I'm having a conversation with somewhere else? Where's that chair sitting? So I sit in every single chair in my mind's eye or sofa or banquette, whatever it is, and say, what am I seeing? Who am I talking to? Where am I putting my drink down? How is this comfortable?
Yeah. Yeah. How am I living in this room?
How am I living in this room?
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
and you had said, I'm just throwing back what everything you guys have ever said. It's like,
Lord knows.
but this is the opposite of cancel culture. This is like repeat it, you know? You had said that like if the arms on the sofa aren't worn after 10 years, or if the rug is in pristine condition, you haven't done your job. Like, it's not
I think it's true. I don't think it's about, I haven't done my job like, oh, everything should have been much more durable and nothing should be worn out. I remember my first years in New York City, one of my friends was married and she had this beautiful duplex on 79th Street and Madison Avenue. We all just gathered there for everything. And there was this wood paneled living room where every Sunday night we'd come over for chicken curry, we'd go decorate the Christmas tree, we'd have drinks after parties, we'd do it all. And this room everybody gravitated towards this room. And it was beautiful, but it really wasn't about the fact that it was decorated beautifully.
Right.
It was that it was so comfortable. There were ottomans in the right places. There was a piano. There was a desk. There was a desk chair that got pulled around. So it's like something that really stuck with me. But I remember they lived there for about 10 years. And after 10 years, it looked a little shabby.
Yeah.
But it looked loved. And I'm like, that is the most important thing I think that we can do. And everyone hates that first phone call, like, someone spilled red wine on the dining room rug. And I'm going, fabulous. That's exactly what I want happening. Like, I want you living. This is what we're here to do. So
Yeah.
It's real.
it's real. And then once they get the first stain, you call the guy and he cleans it and whatever. And then the next, you don't even get a phone call about the next one because they learn. It's going to happen. And, just have fun and enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great point. And as you were talking about like these emotional rooms, it's like we get asked all the time, what do you look for in a house? And maybe that's what was very attractive about this topic was I think there's an emotion that it's hitting and we're seeing something, but it's not, I don't think the only way we ever are able to, at least me, answer what we're looking for in the next issue of Veranda is like, if it's like a theme, you know what I mean? Well, we had on the water issue, we need more houses on the water, but it's not, I think a lot of times I sense there's like looking for a more of a specific answer because that's obviously something you can respond to. And it's not, it's this thing that can't be named kind of thing. You know it when you see it.
Yes.
And it's like good taste and warmth in whatever that form that takes, right?
Yeah.
Yang, you work on, we talked about you work on a large number of historic properties in Atlanta that have layers of renovations. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have this as well, where you've gone in and there's been layers and layers of renovations. What's the most important when you're coming into a historic room that has these layers? How do you find and resurrect and even rebuild its sense of self?
Well, I think part of it has to be, if I look at 20s architecture, it's the architecture, the details of interiors, and the landscape all connected.
Say that again?
It's the architecture, interiors, and landscape.
Yeah.
And I think our good projects, I work with the great landscape architect, I work with the great interior designer,
Yeah.
and I try to provide the background and architecture, millwork, detailing, and it's a collaborative process.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of details are the little details, and a lot of times when we have projects, we do storylines and create stories, and those layers of those homes have that. But also, we want to give it the next 80 years of life.
Yeah. And you need all three. You had said, like, you need all three layers of interior
yeah.
design, architecture, and that's not something you always can get, right?
Yeah.
Like, but when it does, that maybe that's those projects.
And then, really, I take the cues from the house,
yeah.
you know, and how do I make that relevant for today?
Yeah.
And where the details of the house are very specific, we might streamline it, we might elaborate on it, but then, you know, it speaks of the architecture. And I've been fortunate to work on a lot of Schutzzy homes, Neil Reed, you know, and it's always fun because you learn.
Yeah.
You learn from what's given you. You don't need to be a peacock. I mean, I think I usually leave that up to the interior designers.
Thank
No
you.
pressure.
Exactly, no
But
pressure.
I think I can provide the scale, the proportion, the lighting.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of my lines is, architects have affairs and interior designers have relationships.
Oh, I don't know.
And so-
Well, I love to say, what you said, you don't need to be a peacock. You know, I feel like every room doesn't need to be this showstopper, like, look at me, look at me, look at me. I think there's something that needs to be kind of calming throughout the house, and people say, oh, you use so much color, you use so much pattern. How does that feel? Kind of, your houses don't feel jarring. They feel restful, and I think a lot of times it's finding that sort of decorative thread that weaves itself through the house, a color that sort of keeps reappearing, that you know, subconsciously say, okay, I've seen that before, I've seen that before. You know, it might be mixed with another color you haven't, but I think it's that decorative thread that kind of weaves through the house that keeps rooms from being peacocks, you should say.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with peacocks.
You gotta have one peacock. That's okay. That's okay. And a lot of times that's the dining room or it's the powder room. It's like the showstopper. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with a showstopper, but we don't want the whole house to look like, look.
Yeah, I think when it's successful, I mean, I find it's more about balance. And so, I mean, and I tend to personify things, but even the renovation and its addition, I mean, you don't want to be submissive to the house and say, tell me what to do, I can't think for myself. And you also don't want to be, you know, argumentative with it and be like, I know better than you do, look at me. And so I find it's the same thing with, you know, landscape architects and interior designers. I mean, I think, and even the homeowners, I mean, I use this analogy a lot of feeling like it's sort of like a great dinner party where you don't want somebody like dominating the table.
Yeah.
Or maybe a great panel discussion. I don't know.
Yes.
But you don't want somebody like dominating the table and saying like, here's what we're going to do and here's what you're going to, you know.
Yeah.
And then you also don't want to, you know, feel like there's nothing really being said and nobody's really happening. So to me, when it's healthy, there's this sort of energy that the thing that you do together is bigger than any single person would have done. And I think that's part of a good teammate. And it's a different conversation every time with different players, but it's always this sort of like healthy energy that's there. And I think
agree.
that's kind of what, to me, I enjoy. And that
I
makes it
agree,
fun.
and you said you learn something every time. I mean, I don't always work with the same landscape architect or the same architect, and I think it's the most exciting part of the project is that kind of teamwork that does include the homeowner, obviously.
Well, the client that wants you to solve a different problem. You know, it
Exactly,
makes it
and
fun.
it really makes it fun, and I think it's a wonderful learning curve every single time.
You know, I just thought of this. There's also in the upcoming issues, November, December, which I am thoroughly, like I can almost like recite it all back. I just got finished reading the whole thing several times over. We have a story in there about parties, you know, and connection in parties and what's, you know, seating charts, not for that like, it's for connection, you know, how do you do that thing? And Jeffrey Billhuber said, you want 1 + 1 = 3. So you need to seat people who would complement each other in a way that would, you know, create a greater whole, you know? And I mean, they said a lot of things in this party conversations thing. You know, some of them, our copy editor would be like, Ellen, you know we can't say this. And I was like, I know, but neither Steele or I had the heart to take it out. We needed somebody else to take it out, you know? And I just imagined, I imagine our copy editor going, like late at night going, Ellen, really? You know? But anyway, that's a great story, but it's also, it's not about the plates, like the whole idea of that, I think I'm on just a kick these days, you know, was to talk about, I knew we'd be craving connection again, you know, and so like the warmth of all that, and you know, one of the things you said too, it's not just the team, it's also like, you mentioned homeowners. Sometimes you get that poetry from having homeowners that.
Absolutely.
And they push you in directions that you're like, oh, sometimes you just want to, you know, kill them, for lack of a better word. But when it's finished, you're like, you know, it pushed me in a way that I wasn't expecting to be as successful as it is, and I'm really, really proud of that. And that's, I think, exciting.
I think in some ways, but I do think there's times where you can have a homeowner, and none of them are here, I don't think, that I do think dominates the conversation, and you do just get tired, and you go, okay, this is a lame dinner party. Like, okay, I listened to all your stories, I did what you told me, and it does. But the project still turned out great.
Yeah, right.
I think the aftermath, you're just kind of like, that just wasn't much fun. You know, and I actually have found that as I do this longer, I actually enjoy the chemistry almost more than the architecture in some ways. It's a strange thing. So I enjoy the right energy.
Well, you got to stir it up.
Yeah.
You got to stir it up, and then it's like gumbo. You know.
It's like gumbo.
And I always say, I've never met an architect I didn't like. Like, I love working with the architects.
Well, because they're all great. Yeah.
They're all great, and they're all different, and they're all unique, and they all have different ways of working. And I love, that's kind of my favorite part of the process, to be honest.
And also, I think we don't live in the products that we produce. And I think I want the kids running around, you know, going down that railing.
Yep.
If they hurt themselves, that's on them.
That's the problem. I agree. I couldn't agree more.
But it's like a good house has to be lived in.
Yeah.
And so is there anything that, you know, as you're going through there, you kind of, let's just say, like, it sounds like there's some projects where you just make peace. You know, it's like part of the it's like you know that, listen, this is your house. You know, because I imagine these are things you're up against all the time. But you probably have things that you're like, but I know, like, easy wins kind of thing that will add a bit of warmth kind of thing. And I'm not asking you what they are, because I didn't, you know, I don't want to put you on the spot like that, because I don't know what they are. But like, I would imagine that you're like, okay, we can just take this down a different path.
Well, I have a good example, and that is building my own house in Millbrook, New York.
Let's do it, yeah.
Can we talk about my husband? He was like, just do whatever you want, I don't care. And then as we got kind of into the project, he's like, well, that's so girly, or I don't know what his comments were, but I was going crazy. I was like ready to kill. And then it just kept going and kept evolving, and you know, as you'll see in our book, there's lots of antlers in our living room, and it's very kind of, I have this Michael Smith chintz that I told my husband, it looks like camouflage. It's like camouflage. It's greens and blues. And I think I'm finally admitting to myself for the first time that my husband made this house better. You know, he really did. Because it's our house. It's our family's house. It's his house. It's not just my house and how I want to decorate my house, you know?
Yeah.
Because we all know how we want to do it. And so I thought that was sort of an extreme example of the client that kind of pushes you, and you sort of listen, and you're like, okay, and then you sort of admit, like, you know, that kind of worked a little bit better than I thought it would. So
yeah.
I'm not telling my husband.
Right, I was going to say, nobody's allowed to.
Hope he's not listening.
I mean, Ken, don't you think we're sometimes marriage counselors?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, there's definitely a, well, and I mean, even, not to turn this into a counseling session, but I mean, this sort of like, you know, peacemaker, Enneagram kind of, like, I'm sort of the person. So I will sort of say, I don't think you should paint your house that color. I don't think you should paint your house, don't paint your house. And they're like, I'm doing it. I'm like, okay, it's your house. Like, I tend to, like, I'll fight to a point, and then it's a point where I'm like, you know, I've said my piece.
You've
I've tried,
said it,
and
yeah,
you kind of move on. And,
Yeah.
you know,
But I
so-
also try to like create man caves for my guys.
You do.
That's such a smart thing to do.
Because
You
I
have
mean,
to.
let's face it,
You have to.
the interior design on the first level, it's all about,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes just guys just want to
Yeah.
get away.
Yeah, and you know that they'll be happier, like from as a whole, if they know that there's part that, like Ashley, it reflects them as well. So however you get there,
Well,
right?
I mean, it's
Well-
glad you added antlers. I mean, come on.
I know, no, I think it actually looks great. And my husband has a room. My husband is a big hunter, and he has this room downstairs that he built that's just, I mean, it's the guns and the ammunition, the camouflage, everything. And I mean, Peter Penoyer comes to our house, Gil Schaefer comes to our house, every important, you know, in Millbrook, we've got these people that are our neighbors, and they'll all come for dinner and cocktails. Everyone leaves talking about my husband's hunting room downstairs. They're like, Andrew, that was amazing. That's so cool. I'm like, oh my
Well,
God.
what's the best
Seriously?
is, like, accidentally eats the peacock.
It's sort of like, I did choose the green paint color. Okay, that's it. That's as far as I got. But anyway, to your point,
Yeah.
gotta have a man cave.
How are we doing on time here? I forgot to ask for. Okay, let's. How about we open it up to questions, if that's because it's like 10.
10 to, yeah.
Oh, great, perfect. Okay, maybe I've done this before.
Ah,
Right.
nailed it.
Questions? Anyone about anything? Yes. Oh, great. Thanks, Katie. Oh, that looks.
Hi. So I'm a Florida girl too, and I love bringing the outdoors in. I love having the organic, and I feel like it brings different, not only just life to the room, but also different shapes and features. But a lot of times I have clients that are terrified of plants, and I understand that, but they just won't go for it. So how do you feel about faux plants, or do you have another avenue? I've recently gotten into dried florals because were real, but you don't have any upkeep. So,
Yes.
I'm just curious how you kind of would handle that situation.
Well, I'm Florida girl too, obviously, and I do feel strongly about having plants in a room. I mean, it just brings a room to life. And one thing I do is I try to train someone who works in the house.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, I'm like, soak this orchid 1 hour a week. And, you know, we're always there. We're always back. We're always sort of judging and helping. And so if you can get someone in the house to really help take care of plants, that's an amazing thing. The other thing I say, go to Home Depot and buy a Boston fern or a Kimberly fern. And I mean, it really gives so much life to a room. And if you kill it in 4 months, 86 it and go back to Home Depot and get another one.
I think
But
having a real plant.
yes, so the answer is no. I say no dried florals, no fake anything. I'd rather see maybe nothing than that. But there's certain ferns that just can't be. In fact, that blue fern that was just in that picture, I want to say that thing is like 6 years old. It's still living. I'm like, how is this thing alive? I mean, it's sort of a miracle, but simple plants, teaching your client, teaching someone in the house how to take care of it.
It's a great
It's
question
worthwhile.
because
It's really
so relevant
worthwhile.
to exactly
Yeah.
what creates this.
But like tall spaces, what about tall corners where you really need like a tree?
A fig.
A fig is a wonderful
Fig.
thing, or a ficus.
Yeah.
You know, it's coming. 80s are coming back full circle. I feel like with the ficus trees, those you can't kill. I mean, I had one of those in my first New York City apartment. I think my roommate still has it in LA somewhere. This ficus tree. So those, just finding things that are hardy and easy, and you know, letting them kind of play with it themselves and see what happens, and guiding them along the way. But very, very important. I do feel like that's makes a room alive.
Hi, I'd like for each of the panelists to talk about a project that they're working on now that's in flight that they may be particularly excited about.
Ooh, that's a great question.
Well, I'll let Jan
We'll
go
go down
first.
the line.
I'm actually becoming a developer doing a mountain project that I'm going to pivot from historical to real modern architecture. And I think there is a generational shift. And I think part of it has to do with my girls, to kind of give them something. And, you know, and that will kind of work with what I've been talking about, indoor, outdoor, small architecture, great views, modern architecture connected with nature. And I think after this year, you know, I want to be out there more.
Yeah. When you mentioned that earlier, I was thinking, my brother moved to Montana earlier last year, and so I've been out there a few times, and my favorite house is this modern, it has so many of these views, and it's just one of those things where, like, I was so struck by how well modernism fits into that landscape and really complements it and brings it all in.
Well, in the South, there's so many beautiful views, like we're in the Pisgah National Forest, close to 1 million acres, and a lot of the older homes, you're in a dark wooden box with no views, with a ton of porches, and you're looking at, and it's like, that's not how I want to live.
Yeah.
And I think having that kind of aesthetics and indoor, outdoor is a new way for the South to really appreciate
That's a great point.
nature. And to be by the Blue Ridge Parkway, 20 waterfalls, you know, having pristine trout water, that kind of gets me motivated.
Our next panel will be there.
I agree.
Sales pitch.
I
I'm in.
agree.
Ashley, what about you?
Well, we're working on a project. This is sort of crazy, but during COVID, I went to see my client in Millbrook. It was like the heat of COVID, and he's in commercial development. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, we're buying up distressed hotels." And I said, "We'll buy the Cottonwood right coming into town. It's a roadside. I mean, this is Schitt's Creek personified." I said, "You buy it, I'll decorate it." I have this fantasy. I mean, you pass it every time you come into Millbrook, and it's right there, and it's, you know, practically on the road, and the potential is enormous. And so about 3 days later, he said, "Oh, I bought the Cottonwood." I'm like, "You did? Okay." So we are starting that, and he bought a big property next door. So it's going from an 18-room hotel to a 50-room hotel. So motel to a 50-room hotel. So I'm not quite sure where it's going, what the direction's going to be. I'm really taking the architect's lead. This is someone who works on his team all the time on his projects. So I haven't even seen the plans for it yet, and I'm really, really excited.
But it's going to be fun.
Oh, it's going to be so much fun. It's in my backyard, too. I mean, that's what's
amazing.
also nice about it. So,
I guess for me, I've got a project coming up in Blowing Rock that, you know, the client, you know, wants this kind of, I guess you'd call it modern, but it's a kind of jaggedy rock site and lots of views, but he's talked about this sort of wabi-sabi idea of, like, you know, the sort of weathered things connected with nature, and, you know, so it's still in that wonderful, like, wow, this could be a really cool house, and hasn't come to the reality of what it's going to cost to do that. So it's a kind of a fun, and we're so booked out that I can enjoy the fantasy for probably another 3 or 4 months before reality. So I'm excited about it. I hope the reality.
Well, that's like
lives up.
modern architecture and nature.
Yeah. So it's a lot of things that are themes that I'm finding speak to me that there'll be a chance to explore. So that's fun.
well, the most exciting projects are the ones you haven't actually started yet.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. So it's
there's no friction
It's
yet.
definitely in the
It's
honeymoon
just in the-
period right now.
exactly.
Yeah.
The reality hasn't set in yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is interesting. All 3 of us brought up Project Vietnam.
Yes. Great question.
I would never describe myself as a minimalist, but I'm certainly not a maximalist. I've known Yong since he started, in full disclosure. But one of the hallmarks of a truly masterful architect or designer is the refinement of restraint. And you all touched on this about the peacock and the collaboration, but can you talk a little bit more about when you're working together, the point of restraint, of knowing when to stop, knowing when you've done enough?
Ooh, good question.
You want me to start?
Yes.
Okay. I think part of it is I'm not in the Instagram world, and there's a lot of instant gratification, and I think part of when you start looking at refinement, it takes a lot of study. And refinement takes, you have to figure things out. You also have, like Ken said, balance.
Yeah.
And appropriateness, I think, is really important. And so if I look at, when I study Schutze, I study really great architects in New York, because New York was the epicenter. There is a lost art of detailing and millwork. And millwork has always been in the middle for a lot of architects. They kind of shuffle it off to interior designers or the contractor. And I think, Ken, you do the same thing. I mean, millwork's a big part of our drawing package. And having that subtlety in the millwork, I think creates a great background for interiors. You know, the only time I get into the finish is it going to be wood or is it going to be painted? And if it's painted, I love getting surprised by the interior designer. And so I think part of it is just subtlety and nothing, you know, everybody wants things instantly and quickly. And it takes time and research a little bit to get things.
Well, and I wouldn't even say maturity. I mean, I would say, like, I think when we were younger as a firm and you got a commission, you didn't want to underdo it. You didn't want to, like, not have everything in there. And what I've realized is I think we've gotten better at balance. And I think some of it is the architecture doesn't have to work as hard if there's a wall, if you've got a good interior designer.
Yeah, definitely.
Give them the white space to do something. And I think we would feel like, oh, we need to panel this, and we need molding here, and we need to have bookcases. And we just would do so much architecture. And I think that's, as you do it more, you realize, you know, I need a few moments, but I don't need everything to be a moment. And I think that's just, you know, growing up and learning.
And
Growing up.
I think our restraint is just really trying not to attach ourselves to the trends, which are very tempting, you know, and I won't go through them all right now because I think we all use them to some degree. But, you know, making sure that this house is going to feel relevant 20 years from now, 60 years, 80 years from now, and not kind of gravitating toward everything that's happening in the moment. So that takes a little restraint because it's easy to do, I think.
I think we're, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I feel very like warm and sense of belonging in this room. Like everybody, there's so much warmth, and so I hope we'll all take that over to Tebow, where we have some exciting book signings. And if you do think of any other questions, they'll be around. So
Tebow, and that's Suite 140.
Thanks so much,
Ellen.
Thank you.